Hello and welcome to Developing a NAMA Quickscreen, the first webinar in the series Developing Financeable NAMAs. My name is Melissa Harris and I'm a project manager with the Climate Change and Energy team at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I will be moderating the session today and we have a distinguished group of presenters. Dave Sawyer is an associate with IISD and he will provide an overview of our current NAMA trends, IISD NAMA tools, and on-the-ground experience. Jason Dion is an economist with IISD, and he will provide an overview of our new course, Developing a NAMA Quickscreen, using practical application examples. Frédéric Gagnon-Lebrun is VP of Carbon Markets and Climate Policy with EcoResource. He will discuss the joint IISD EcoResource project, NAMAs in the Congo Basin, where the Quickscreen approach was used to identify NAMA options for 10 Congo Basin countries. This will be a 1-hour webinar. The first half of the webinar will be presentations, followed by 20 to 25 minutes for Q&A. Before I hand things over to Dave Sawyer, our first speaker, I want to provide a few administrative tips. We hope you will interact with us in this webinar. If you have any questions, they can be typed into the questions section near the bottom of your console at any time during the webinar. Be sure to click on the plus button beside the word questions in order to expand the question pane. A box will appear where you can type in your questions. As mentioned, after the speakers have presented, there will be an opportunity for Q&A. We will try to address as many questions as possible during this portion of the webinar, but any unanswered questions will be answered by the presenters at a later date and posted in our online course forum. Note that the webinar recording will also be posted in the online course. During the Q&A session, we will also be addressing questions that have already been posted by participants in the online course forum. Likewise, if you think of questions after the webinar, I encourage you to register and post them in the course forum. Another way you can interact is through polls. Presenters may launch a poll during their presentations. These are useful for gathering webinar participant input and learning more about you and your needs surrounding NAMAs. More than 200 people registered for this webinar. Polls are a great way for everyone to participate. As a warm-up, I'm going to launch a poll now. Please select the region from where you are accessing this webinar. I'll give everyone a few seconds to make your selection. Okay, the results show that 13% of participants are from Africa, 31% from Asia and Oceania, 33% from Europe, 13% from Latin America and the Caribbean, and 10% from North America. So it looks like European representation is the highest. I will now launch another poll. And please let us know the sector that you represent. Okay, so 24% from government, 44% from the private sector, and 32% from civil society. So it's interesting that private sector is the most represented here today. Our first speaker today is Dave Sawyer, an associate with IISD. Dave is an environmental economist with over 20 years of national and international experience. He has built a solid reputation as a leader in the economics of climate policy and energy futures in Canada, and his advice is routinely sought by a wide selection of climate policy leaders throughout the world. His diverse and prolific profile includes energy and climate change, air pollutant economics, environmental and natural resource economics, and water and wastewater economics. We're happy to have him with us today. Dave, can I turn it over to you?
Great, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm excited to be here, and I'm really thankful for our team who put a lot of work and effort into putting this webinar together, including 2 more webinars to follow, and we'll talk a bit about that in a second. So good work, team, and thank you, and welcome participants from the world. It's very exciting. So IISD, I'm going to talk briefly about what IISD has been up to, one slide, and then talk about how that's informed some of our thinking and how we ended up where we are today, which is with the practitioner's guide, some country case examples, and an e-learning course that we're rolling out over the next 3 webinars, including the online course. IISD has been working on low carbon and adaptation work for about 12 to 14 years. And during that time, we've talked a lot about adaptation and mitigation synergies. We've talked a lot about sustainable development and how you sort of complement sustainable development with adaptation and mitigation. But operationally, as with a lot of other groups, a lot of other governments, and a lot of really analytics, these two streams, mitigation and adaptation, were quite separate. And in fact, for a time, sustainable development sort of became secondary to a focus on mitigation. You can think of the CDM, you can think of additionality, you can think of carbon markets, and it was an exclusive focus on sort of the additionality of mitigation, and there were all these sort of secondary benefits. And I think since Copenhagen, a lot of that has changed, and we're starting to see sort of adaptation and mitigation working together much more closely. And we're really into a new era where it's sustainable development first, and then adaptation and mitigation then complement development objectives. In a sense, we're back to the future and where we were. And the same can be true for IISD, where although we had one program on climate change and energy, we were doing all this work on low carbon development, and we were doing all this work on adaptation, risk reduction, and resilience. And we weren't really working and talking together as much as we should have. So on the low carbon development side, we were working recently in Kenya on their climate action plan, and we did a couple of elements of work there. We were doing some sort of foundational work with Eco Resources in the Congo Basin, and we sort of realized through all that work, you know what, there's a real lack or dearth of information on a practitioner's guide and basic guidance on how to just step through developing a NAMAs, recognizing that NAMAs are a new topic and frankly a dynamic topic changing in time. At the same time, we're doing a bunch of work globally on resilience. We're doing some climate resilience and food security work in Central America, looking at adaptation metrics and how those local metrics can inform national level policy. So basically putting a window into national level policy and planning with adaptation metrics. Of course, we have our Crystal adaptation tool, community-based tool to help sort of reveal the implications of adaptation. We've been doing some work on value chains in coffee in Uganda, and finally a large climate risk management project in a number of countries globally. And through all this process in parallel, we sort of looked at each other and said, wait a minute, we can do this better. So we're starting to look at low carbon climate resilient development. We see a major trend in climate compatible development taking off, or low carbon climate resilient development rising. Now, no matter what you call this, I think there are really three elements, and there are a bunch of terms kicking around. There are really three core elements of this new trend that we think is really important. One is sustainable development first. So without a doubt, climate action has to underpin and complement development. So this is really about development first and how you basically select mitigation and adaptation actions that complement development. So basic stuff, but really an important piece, especially on the analytics, where you want to start with development objectives first and then think about adaptation and mitigation. Second element is adapted to reduce climate vulnerability and risk, dampening climate change impacts, reducing ongoing climate risks. So a very strong theme around adaptation, of course, and then transitioning to low carbon futures is the third theme, adopting lower emitting technology and changing behaviors, and really about increasing carbon efficiency in time. And again, there are these sort of three initiatives, or three themes, but really it's, well, how do they work together and how do they complement each other? And I think that's where we are in low carbon climate resilient development. It's really operationalizing old concepts, and finally there's some inertia around, okay, how do we do this? And we try to do that as we roll forward with our practitioner's guide. Beyond our SD, adaptation mitigation, we're seeing these sort of sub-trends emerge. So development first, as I mentioned, then bundle adaptation and mitigation. So again, your analytics and your thinking and embedding in government starts with what are our development plans and priorities, and then how do we impact those to basically complement with adaptation and mitigation, and bundling adaptation and mitigation together where you can. So success nestles climate action within national development plans, first, priority. Second, adaptation mitigations are then bundled and complement development aspirations. So perhaps we can think of analytical assessments, or we can think of low carbon choices that are not just about least cost dollars per tons, but also that maybe provide adaptation synergies. You can think of afforestation projects bundled with cook stove programs that suddenly make cook stove programs a lot more interesting from both a development perspective with all the co-benefits, mitigation perspective on emissions, and then afforestation issues and reforestation issues around food security and basically local impact. So and renewable firewood. So you can see that sort of bundling of choice that's happening. I think what's really important is another major sub-theme is moving from technical analyses that are pretty much sitting in environment departments. So you can think technology assessments, you can think national communications, you can think emission inventories. These are and mitigation scenarios. these are very technical pieces of work that a lot of us do, but where we're going to be successful and where we're seeing success is that technical analysis turns into a government process that is then being led, or at least being, at least including national planning or ministries of finance. So increasingly we're seeing mitigation and adaptation. They're establishing beachheads and line ministries and central agencies. While it is important to coordinate these initiatives, the scope and scale of these NAMAs, especially given that they're cross-cutting and low-carbon development is cross-cutting, they really have to get out of environment and into agencies that have the authorities to basically appropriate, set money, basically objectives, and implement planning priorities. So moving beyond the traditional home and technical and environment departments. Next, the best practice in Kenya, we see, how does this work in practice? Well, one, we have a development plan. We've got a bunch of national flagship investments that may or may not be mitigation or adaptation oriented. And the first thing you do is you basically take a look at those and see if there are opportunities for climate proofing them for adaptation and mitigation opportunities. So you basically set up an assessment framework, and you basically say what are the opportunities here to move forward. And secondly, we can look at new climate investments. So this is your typical mitigation scenarios or adaptation planning. So this complements basically taking a look at longer-term planning opportunities with new opportunities to transition economies to climate, low carbon, climate resilient futures. So please take the poll for a second. So in general, how well do we think developing country national governments and practitioners likely understand appropriate actions for low carbon development? That's quite a strong result, isn't it? So moving forward, after we've been working in these areas and thinking about low carbon, climate resilient development, we put together a NAMAS practitioner guide. We basically looked around about a year ago and said, okay, there's not a lot of guidance, and more guidance is coming out daily, and we took some of our experiences and rolled it out into a practitioner's guide. Jason Dion is going to talk into more detail about that. And we've taken that practitioner's guide and we basically ported it or moved it into 3 modules in the e-learning exercise that we're going to present today. And again, Jason's going to talk a little more about that. 3 elements of the 3 modules, basically NAMA Quick Screen, NAMA Deep Screen, so Jason will talk a bit about that, and then preparing a GHG emission baseline projection, an important piece of basically rolling forward. We'd like to thank Environment Canada and IDRC for supporting this work. So moving on to the learning course, so we've developed the NAMA Quick Screen. We're going to talk about that today into an e-learning course that you can access. Self-directed learning opportunity. The course has 5 sections. There's an overview section, there's a basic information section, what are NAMAs and how do they relate to low carbon, climate resilient development. There's a financing NAMAs section, obviously absolutely critical around the technical work to complement the technical work. Developing NAMA concepts, so the quick screen methodology, Jason's going to talk a bit about that. I won't go into great detail. And the next steps in supplementary resource. So where do you go from here after you've completed the course? So there are some features in the course. Basically, an important feature is progress tracking. So once you log into the course, you start playing around with the course, you can basically track your progress to see where you are and where you're going, and basically walk through the elements that are of interest to you in the course. We have some self-tests with feedback, so there's some little questions in there to prompt you and to keep you awake and basically to take a look at the different information and see where you are. Self-tests with feedback. And finally, we provide a way forward, so there's planned uses after the pilot run. So we're doing a piloting phase right now, and we're going to be developing this learning course as a bit of a dynamic tool. So it's going to be freely available as a self-directed course. There's going to be online space to provide face-to-face workshops for participants with resources. We're going to have supplements to the webinars, and of course, funding dependent, we may be presenting courses to individuals and to groups rolling forward. So that's it for me. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the webinar.
So thanks very much, Dave. It's Jason Dion here. So I'll be presenting the specific steps involved in a NAMAS quick screen, illustrating each with examples pulled from actual NAMAS work experience. So here you'll see an overview of the quick screen methodology. We'll be going over each of these steps individually. So let's get right into it. The first step is research and categorization. So here you would start by collecting information from available studies and publications. And you'd cover a lot of different aspects in this scan, stuff like economic growth, the country's socioeconomic context, greenhouse gas emissions, both current and projected, the government's national priorities, and you'd also look at government policies and priorities for the 6 UNFCCC mitigation sectors, those being agriculture, energy, forestry and other land use, industry, transport, and waste. And you would also look at the context of these 6 sectors in the country. So for the forestry sector, you might look for information like the amount of forest cover and rates of deforestation. And for the energy sector, you'd look at things like the energy mix, energy supply and demand, households' level of energy access, that sort of thing. And on top of all this, you would look for relevant planned or ongoing initiatives in the 6 sectors on the part of government, civil society, the private sector, multilateral institutions, and donors. So a partial sample of the relevant documents collected for the Kenya Quick Screen is provided on the right. The key thing here in this step is that you're looking to cast a wide net and then to manage all the information that you collect. You don't know what will prove to be relevant later on, so it's important to tag information by sector, to keep track of source information, and to consider using a piece of information management software. So for this, we used MindJet's Mind Manager. And the reason being that we do this step in this way is that our experience has shown that it's best to collect and organize all this information at once in the beginning rather than going back later to look for specific things. And I see we've jumped to a poll. So do you know where to find the types of information included in the desktop research? So I'll just wait while everyone fills in their responses. And so we see that the main answer is that perhaps some of the types are known where to be found. Others know where to look, and others are a little bit unsure. So there is some information on this provided in more detail in the course, and of course we're able to facilitate that sort of thing. So the next part of this first step is categorization of the key information collected. So here you're looking to categorize 3 types of information. The first is government priorities. So there you're looking for national and sectoral level priorities. You're going to categorize ongoing initiatives and break these down by sector, as well as planned activities and recommendations, which would also be broken down by sector. And here you would use your judgment on how best to group and categorize information. As you'll see in the example for government priorities in Bangladesh, the priorities have been paraphrased and grouped to facilitate analysis. You would do the same for ongoing initiatives and recommendations and planned activities as well. So the second step in the quick screen process is the long list of potential NAMAs. So here, the lists of ongoing initiatives, recommendations, and planned activities that were developed in step 1 would form the basis of this long list. The long list is basically a kitchen sink approach. So everything that might be a viable NAMA gets considered in the analysis. And again, here you would use your judgment with regard to how to group and define NAMAs. So in the example from Trinidad and Tobago, specific potential NAMAs have been grouped and then named by the analyst. It's important to organize the potential NAMAs by sector and to keep track of the source information. This way the evidence for the suitability of the NAMA can be easily cited. So in this step, you're just basically gathering everything that the literature says might be a viable option for the country. And then after this long list, you would move to the next step, the short list. So this step screens the long list according to a number of key criteria. So here you would screen out potential NAMAs that do not have significant mitigation potential, that don't align with stated government priorities, that do not have evidence of existing action, either ongoing or recommended action, or the NAMAs that can't offer neutral or positive economic, social, environmental, and climate resilience co-benefits. And in doing this step, you would use evidence where possible and expert opinion where necessary. And the result at the end of this step is a short list of NAMAs that are believed to be viable for the country. So here you'll see a partial sample of a short list from a NAMAs quick screen for Rwanda. You'll see that it assesses mitigation, alignment with priorities, evidence of existing action, and co-benefits. So all of these options would have been originally in the long list, and these are all the ones that made it through the screening process to the short list. So after you've developed the short list, the fourth step is development of a quick screen report. The report offers a summary of findings and summarizes the practitioner's understanding of what are the potential viable NAMAs for the country, based on the information that's publicly available. So this report, once it's produced, can be used for things like raising awareness, for identifying data gaps and areas for further study, for facilitating dialogue among stakeholders in the country, for forming the basis for fact sheets to share with potential funders, or to form the basis for submission of NAMA concepts to the UNFCCC registry as NAMAs seeking support for preparation. So here you'll see the outline of a typical quick screen report. This is the layout that's found in ISD's Bangladesh quick screen as well as other reports. However, before this report can be published and shared, its findings need to be validated, and this is the next and final step. So in this step, you would validate and finalize the report. Findings are validated since they might not reflect new developments or key on-the-ground realities. There are three ways to do this, with the most preferable options listed first. The first option is to hold in-country stakeholder meetings to validate the findings of the report. Ideally, this could be done earlier in the process as well as findings emerge. The second option is to organize a formal review by country experts and/or the country's climate change unit. And the third would be to just discuss the results with officials from relevant ministries and from the climate change unit. So once this consultation is done, you would update the report based on the feedback provided to produce a finalized version of the report that has now been locally validated. This final report provides a summary of all the NAMAs that are believed to be viable for the country and why, as well as useful context information. And so then this brings us to a final optional step. Following the quick screen exercise, a country may choose to follow this analysis of potential options with a deep screen analysis, as presented in the next webinar. Or, if the country wishes, it may submit its preferred NAMA options to the UNFCCC NAMA registry as NAMA seeking support for preparation in order to seek funding for further analysis. All the information required for this submission will have been assembled in the course of the quick screen. The UNFCCC template, seen at right, as well as guidance and support for completing it, are provided through the guidebook and the course, which both present the information seen here today in greater detail. So this concludes the overview of the steps of the quick screen. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Jason. Just a quick reminder that you can type any questions you have into the panel on the side, and our panelists will address those in the Q&A session. Our next speaker is Frédéric Gagnon-Lebrun. Frédéric is a co-founder of EcoResource Carbon and is responsible for overseeing the strategic direction and business planning of EcoResource. He provides advice and insight to project teams, especially on carbon finance, GHG management strategies, and regulatory advisory services. Frédéric has more than 9 years of experience on carbon markets and climate change issues and projects. Frédéric, can I pass it over to you?
Thank you very much, Melissa, and it is a great pleasure to be here with you today. I will be presenting some of the lessons learned in applying the quick screen analysis that Jason just presented in Africa, and then present some concluding remarks for this webinar. ISD and EcoResources teamed up to implement a multi-phase program in the Congo Basin countries that was aimed to prioritize, design, and start implementing some NAMAs. It was really an exercise in scoping out what would be the NAMA potential in these 10 countries. And this was a great opportunity for us to sort of ground truth and test the quick screen methodology that we developed. So these 10 countries are essentially, I won't name them all, but they include DRC, so the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Republic of the Congo, Cameroon, Rwanda, Gabon, and a few other smaller countries. And the program was developed into three phases. The first one was the quick screen, and I will talk to you especially about that phase and lessons learned from that phase today. In the second phase, we conducted earlier this year 4 capacity building workshops. There were 2-day workshops in 4 countries, and managed to bring together representatives from the 10 Congo Basin countries across different sectors and across also government representatives, business, donor agencies, and NGOs. Thirdly, we implemented in around March this year the third phase of this program that was essentially the deep screen assessment in DRC and in Rwanda. And you will hear more about the deep screen and the results of this assessment in next week's webinar. So I'll focus my comments on the lessons learned from the quick screen. But before I do that, I want to note that originally we had envisaged doing only one workshop in the region with the focal points of the UNFCCC, so essentially the climate change negotiators. And it dawned on us early on in the process that it would be much more relevant and we would have a much greater impact if we actually organized 4 capacity building workshops so that we could be able to actually have funding to bring people from the Energy Ministry, the Finance Ministry, as well as business representatives to those workshops. As Dave emphasized, the NAMA is very much an economic policy, development policy that makes sense for climate change reasons as well, but primarily, and especially for these African countries, the focus really was on development, and it made sense to already reach out and explain the concept of NAMA to other stakeholders in these countries. So that was a great success, and we trained more than 100 people in this workshop. So what are some key findings or lessons learned from implementing the quick screen in these 10 countries? The first one is that the key priority clearly is development. That said, there also was quite a bit of interest in an emphasis in implementing adaptation measures, and quite a few of those countries have adaptation plans ready, and some have taken action already on adaptation, as a lot of these countries are least developed countries and are vulnerable to climate change in many ways. And so the challenge here is really to try to work at the intersection of development, adaptation, and mitigation, and find measures that also reduce emissions, but that really make sense from an economic and social development point of view. And this will probably not be very surprising to you, but in Africa, the key sectors where we found that there was a promising potential for implementing NAMAs included agriculture, forestry, and the energy sector especially. And as we were conducting the desktop study and the quick screen, we found it quite challenging for these countries to find reliable data and information. There is quite a bit of information published on the government's development priorities, the economic growth prospects. There were reports and country profiles from the African Economic Outlook, from the World Bank, for example. But when it came to understanding the emission reduction potential, as well as, in some cases, the adaptation priorities, it was actually quite difficult to find reliable data. We relied quite heavily on the national communications, and for those of you less familiar with the UN process, these are reports that developing countries and developed countries develop and submit to the UNFCCC, in which they develop a greenhouse gas inventory, highlight key vulnerabilities to climate change, as well as present key measures that they undertake to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. And in these countries, 5 of them actually had national communications that were older than 2009, and 1 actually country never submitted a national communication. So finding information was quite challenging. And the fact that these national communications were quite old is, on the one hand, a problem because they were somewhat out of date, but the bigger challenge is that those dating back to 2001, 2003 do not reflect the capacity and understanding that the country representatives have gained over the last 10 years. So the quality of the information is also quite different than what we can find in today's national communications. A key lesson also was that the work on the CDM and programs of activities, especially PDDs, can be an interesting starting point because those actually focus on a specific sector and a specific activity. And while we need to be careful because a CDM project cannot just be flipped into a NAMA, clearly not. However, looking at existing CDMs and POAs point to interesting sectors, and we found that quite useful as part of our analysis. And the assumption behind that is that a CDM project presumably is a financially viable activity, and stakeholder consultations have also taken place. The PDD has conducted a quite detailed assessment of the technology. There's information about technology cost, for example. So that can provide quite useful information to try to understand where the NAMA potential may lie in some of these countries. Another lesson was that the results need to be used quite carefully. And in fact, after conducting the desktop study and even validating some of the information with the UNFCCC focal points at the conference in Doha, once we got on the ground in DRC and in Rwanda, we found that the reality on the ground may actually be somewhat different. For instance, in DRC, the diesel consumption is all attributed to the transport sector in the national communication and in the country's inventory, while a lot of the diesel is actually used to provide electricity in rural areas. So that can actually be misleading in terms of the recommendations that we would draw from these exercises. So that said, the QuickScreen provides very useful high-level orientations. And one of the things that the countries we worked with ended up doing after the capacity exercise and using the QuickScreen analysis is that they realized the need to actually develop an institutional framework and a possibly coordinating body to understand the NAMA potential and start tapping into new opportunities that may arise from this new mechanism. So if we just take a step back from that specific project in Africa, as a team with IISD, we conclude that the QuickScreen analysis is a great tool to support the institutional readiness of countries to implement NAMAs. It's a great capacity building tool in the sense that it really lands the concept of NAMA, which can be quite vague in some ways, in very concrete terms and in a way that is tailored for a specific country. And we've seen it in the countries we've worked with. It really helps usually the environment ministry representative to facilitate discussions with other policymakers within the government, and it really is a tool to facilitate the discussions and a tool to help develop a sense of ownership from these governments. It's really helping them make the first step in understanding what the potential might be for developing NAMAs. And it's also a tool that speaks to experts and policymakers across sectors, in the energy, agriculture, and forestry sectors, for instance, and links the concept back to their reality as policymakers or experts. And finally, as Jason said, it's a first cut at understanding what measures can be implemented, what could be the data gaps, and what stakeholders are involved in the different sectors. So it's a great way for governments to start taking next steps and understanding what next steps could be. Finally, I'd like to leave you on with two lessons that we think can reinforce the success of NAMAs internationally. And this loops back to what Dave was saying at the beginning, and also to the usefulness of the QuickScreen. And it is to look for quick wins, essentially, in bundling together development, mitigation, and adaptation. We've seen that for all the developing countries we've worked with, development was at the forefront, and the idea is to mainstream or bundle together mitigation concerns as well as adaptation issues. Now, the challenge here that we've also faced in our work is that they are there are different metrics to measure the success in development and mitigation and in adaptation. There are different types of expertise. There are different communities even working on these issues. There are different methods of delivery and of financing such initiatives as well. However, we've identified some promising synergies around these three at the intersection, essentially, between development, mitigation, and adaptation in agriculture, in forestry, in urban planning, as well as in energy. And the second lesson, which became very clear to us, is that the national and the sectoral processes really matter. This is about sectoral planning, it's about economy-wide planning, and it's about transforming the economy gradually into a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. And for that, there needs to be a mobilization of, at the national level, of several ministries and stakeholders across sectors. And this is why we've seen it in Africa as well. Some countries are starting to want financing to develop, to establish national coordinating bodies. And while this will be a challenge, I think it is one that we need to take on if we want to have the transformative change that is hoped from the NAMAs. So on that note, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the question and answer session.
Thanks very much, Frédéric, and a sincere thank you to all of our speakers. We'll now move into the Q&A section, and we'll take questions from the audience, and I invite Dave to chair this part of the webinar.
So there are two processes, question processes that have rolled forward. One, there was a series of questions that were submitted during the e-learning exercise, some initial piloting during the e-learning exercise, and also some questions have been submitted today through the webinar. There is a whole series of information that we put up on our website, including the practitioner's guide, including links into the e-learning course, and within there we have all kinds of templates that you can use and learn from. So I would suggest you would go to our website, isd.org, /climate/developing, and from there you can basically see the information that we've put up, and there'll also be a link there into the e-learning course, and we'll put the link up to the e-learning course as well at the very end. So a common question we're hearing is, are there subnational NAMAs? So a couple of people asked this question. Do you have examples of subnational NAMAs? Now, of course, from a definitional perspective, a NAMA can be, anything that's fairly substantive in size, and it can, of course, be a regional NAMA. It can be a sectoral NAMA. It can be some sort of national level plan, and it can be real activities. So jurisdiction matters. The question then is whether financing is available and where the financing is coming from, and then who has jurisdiction, I think, is the bigger question. Who has jurisdiction over that NAMA? So when you think of cities, we think of a few services that cities provide and would be absolutely essential to basically developing the NAMA. Now, of course, large transportation projects are generally built in partnership with the national government. But you can think of waste management as being a very good example, where typically waste management, waste facilities are run by the city, large cities anyway. So you can see right away there's some opportunities. And government operations, obviously, municipal governments tend to have large vehicle fleets and large building fleets, and again, there are opportunities there. Frédéric, did you have any additions to that question?
No. That's good, Dave. Yep.
Thank you. Good. Okay. Great. Thank you. The next question was when you say UNFCCC sectors in your table, do you mean the emission sectors of the IPCC guidelines? This is a really interesting question. I'll turn it over to Jason in a second. The national, you can think of it another way. The national level planning sectors in a country don't necessarily align with the IPCC guidelines or the UNFCCC sectors. So there is some issues that have to be, there's some sort of reorganizing and attributing emissions between these different sectors. We decided that we would have a conformance map in a couple of our projects where we basically said, okay, here are the UNFCCC sectors, because ultimately we're trying to put this information, this NAMA information, into the NAMA registry and align with the UNFCCC process. So that's a requirement, but we also had to translate that information so the departments knew what was going on in terms of how they think about emissions. And of course the IPCCC guidelines have very different emission attributions. So generally, to deal with all of this, we had a very strong GHG emission inventory specialist helping us, taking a look at making sure that our emissions accounting was correct in all these areas. Jason, do you have any thoughts or questions there?
No, not anything specific other than to say that our third webinar will focus on these sort of questions, and the gentleman that Dave mentioned will be one of the administrators of that webinar, so he'll be able to provide some more information then as well.
Great, thank you. So the next question in your table, Jason's presentation, shortlist for Rwanda. You classify mitigation potential as high, medium, or low. How do you know the potential that is crucial to the decision-making process? So yeah, we absolutely agree with that, and building on the last comment, that is absolutely the issue. The first thing we did for high, medium, and low, and even though in the quick screen assessment we're doing a qualitative assessment of the mitigation potential and the other co-benefits including resilience, where we are able, we set up quantitative indicators there. So we basically took a look at the emission inventory and took a look at basically the large and small emission sources in the emission inventory, and then put quantitative indicators in there. So less than 1,000 kilotons, 1,000 kilotons to 10,000 kilotons. That sort of range for low, medium, high, depending on what the emission inventory looked like. So a little subjective, but it did allow us to basically put into context the emission reduction opportunities. Jason, did you have a thought there?
Yeah, so I mean, as Frederic mentioned, this information can often be difficult to find. I mean, ideally, and we did have this experience in some countries, it is possible to find some reports that have looked at this question and have put a figure to mitigation potential, or at least by their inclusion of an option, you can assume that it does have significant potential. But this is an area where, I mean, ideally you're going to find that sort of evidence, but otherwise you're going to have to either look to a country expert to provide some expertise, or rely on the opinion of a mitigation specialist. So to look at the various options and what he or she expects them to be. And basically, I mean, with the long list screening to the short list, you're just removing options that you know not to be viable. So if it's something that you're uncertain of, whether it does have medium to high mitigation potential, it might just be reasonable to put medium and keep the option on the table. Mainly you would just screen out options in this quick screen that you know don't have strong mitigation potential. So it is a significant challenge in trying to find that information, but as Dave said, it's kind of a qualitative assessment a lot of the time.
Thank you, Jason. The fifth question, I think, is one of the most important questions that exists in this process. From my experience, you need, this is the question, from my experience, you need to involve the stakeholders from the very beginning. NAMAs are about financing, and NAMAs are about technical solutions, and NAMAs are about government processes. And as analysts, when we work with our partners, we're pretty ignorant actually of a lot of that information. And without the local validation and ground truthing, the process is in trouble from the very beginning. And so the validation process for the quick screen is there to basically say, okay, we've poured through all of your documents. These aren't, this isn't us saying, oh, well, you need a new light rail train system for your city. This isn't us coming up with priorities. This is us identifying in your plans and priorities and in your documents what matters. And still we say, well, we don't quite know if these are right, so let us talk to you about them. So the stakeholder process, and this is back to Frederic's point, is absolutely central to the success of the whole process. And in fact, we think that NAMA's process done correctly, you'll spend way more time and effort on the process and way less on the technical assessment. And you can almost think of success, those being an indicator of success. Frederick, did you have any thoughts on that point?
Yeah, this has been very critical in our project in the Congo Basin countries, and we've really built in even from the very beginning stakeholder involvement with in the way we designed the capacity building workshops, which enabled everyone to understand what a NAMA was and start talking even that jargon in a way and linking it to their own activities so that they could actually have these discussions when they're back in their home country. And we've also, one of the lessons actually that I think is interesting from our work was that we validated the quick screen report only with the focal point initially. We validated the data only with the focal point, and when we actually started consulting more broadly in the two countries where we did in-country work, it appeared to us quite clearly that a broader consultation with other experts from different sectors as well as business representatives is absolutely critical, and to understand where the capacity is. Now, stakeholder involvement goes way beyond consultation as well, and in our in-country work, we've worked very closely with them to make sure that there was a mobilization of both the private sector and government representatives in developing a political a NAMA. And in DRC, for example, we managed to have a sort of political commitment of the energy minister for some actions on biofuels, for instance. So this has to happen, and as Dave says, this is where most of the efforts need to be invested in developing a NAMA.
Thank you, Frederick. The next question is, with your experience in Africa for prioritizing, designing, and implementing NAMAs, what's your experience in agriculture and forestry? Again, it's an important question. If you look at the emission inventories there's two thoughts here. If you look at the emission inventories of most countries in Africa, biomass from non-renewable fuel use, biomass emissions are quite high. And so your big opportunities are sitting really in agriculture and forestry, related to both cooking but also to land use and a whole series of things. So you have a couple of challenges. There's a big challenge in the emission inventory that you have to deal with, and figuring out what is that share of renewable biomass, and how big is the emission inventory. That renewable number on the emission inventory, the share of renewable fuel used in cooking and heating, that can really double. It can double the size of your inventory or more based on what is renewable. And it's a hard number to get your hand on. So there's some very big technical challenges. There's some challenges about viable low carbon actions. A lot of the actors are smallholders, right? So there are issues there. And there's some basic education issues, I think, at the national level about the importance of emissions from agriculture and forestry. Generally, central governments care about electrification and driving to development, and until you reveal the importance of the emissions and the co-benefits, the substantial sustainable development co-benefits that come from agriculture, it's really hard to get their attention because they're fixated on really electrification and sort of fossil fuel use. So yeah, there's some big challenges there. Fred, did you have any thoughts?
The challenges you highlight are very true, and a lot of the countries are really at the stage of those involved in NAMAs, because not all of them have that on their radar. Those involved are really at the stage of scoping out what this might mean for their countries. But the interest lies very much in the fact that those are development actions or policies that could be implemented with the support of climate finance coming from developed countries. So there is an interest in this new opportunity of working with developed countries to implement policies or actions that make sense for their countries as well.
Thank you, Frederick. That was really good. Would you like to deal with question 7 as well?
I can indeed, and so I mentioned that there were opportunities in 3 sectors that we've started identifying at a high level, and the emphasis on adaptation comes from the realization that, for instance, in some of the countries we were working in, desertification and degradation, soil degradation in agriculture is a real issue, and this is why, when looking at it from a development, adaptation, and mitigation point of view, measures such as agroforestry, for example, or soil erosion control measures like terracing make sense for them from a development and adaptation measure, and those measures can also have a mitigation potential that is, for example, in Rwanda, those 2 measures were tagged as having a medium mitigation potential. So those are the kinds of measures that make sense from a development and an adaptation point of view for those countries. In the energy sector, for example, some countries find their hydroelectricity production vulnerable and are starting to look at ways to diversify sources of energy, and start also to take into account the potential impacts of climate change in rural electrification plants, for instance. So that was quite a strong concern about adaptation in our work.
Thank you, Frederick. We really have time to, I guess, address one more question. There are a whole series of questions on GHG inventories, and again, our third webinar in a few weeks' time will go into great detail on GHG inventories. But I think this question 8 is a really important question. Do you have experiences of developing countries that have identified NAMAs by themselves? I guess the approach would be different, and the results also. The Quick Screen Guide recognizes, and the process should recognize from the beginning, that there are a couple ways to step into a NAMA's process. Countries themselves may self-identify a NAMA and say, we need help rolling out this NAMA, and that's the best way to go, because the prioritization, the politics around prioritization should not be underestimated. So to the extent that a central government says this is our priority, good or bad, the system rolls a lot smoother. So prioritization from government matters. That's the best world. As well, the government may have a broader view on longer-term scenarios, and they may want to be doing a scenario exercise that helps to more organically identify priorities and scenarios. And in both of those cases, whether you have a self-selected NAMA or if you're entering into a scenario planning exercise, in both cases, the Quick Screen can be used to help prioritize. So that's it for the questions. I'll now turn it over to Melissa, and she'll have some house cleaning cleanup. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. Thanks. So unfortunately, we will have to stop there. I'd like to thank the audience members for submitting questions and for our panelists for answering them so ably. If we weren't able to address your question today, we have recorded it, and we will provide an answer in written form, and we'll post those in the online course after the webinar. We'll also post the recording of the webinar with the online course. So with that, we'll conclude the webinar. Thanks again to our speakers and to our technical team, Leslie Paz and Pauline Girard, and also to the audience for your participation. And I hope that you can all join us at the webinar on the 9th and the 16th. Thanks again, and have a great day.